New York's gubernatorial race is finally winding down, and we finally got to see Cynthia Nixon debate Andrew Cuomo. And after watching the debate, I would probably say that Cynthia Nixon won overall, and the reason why I'm saying probably instead of definitely is because even if she did a great job putting Andrew Cuomo on defense the entire time, the problem is that the moderators kind of played into Andrew Cuomo's framing of the debate by feeding into this idea that Cynthia Nixon is not qualified and that she's just an actress and doesn't really know what she's talking about and doesn't know how to run a state. And even though I knew that would be a theme during the debate, the problem is that this took place just hours before a massive scandal broke about Andrew Cuomo. And as Vice reports, Andrew Cuomo received $25,000 donation from Harvey Weinstein's law firm. The New York governor accepted the hefty donation at the same time he temporarily halted a probe into the handling of a 2015 case about Weinstein's alleged misconduct. Now, this is a massive, massive scandal, and it not only speaks to Andrew Cuomo's corruption, but his character, covering for a despicable figure like Harvey Weinstein. But the moderators of this debate decided to not open with this or even bring it up at all. And I'm saying that not because I think that the moderators were biased. I'm saying that because it was a short debate and they didn't have time to address a lot of issues, and I think that they probably already planned the questions that they wanted to ask in advance, and when the moderators saw that the story broke, they figured we just don't have time, so we're going to have to ignore it, which is something you just can't do. But overall, I still think this was a great debate. Cynthia Nixon performed exceptionally well, and you really saw a clear distinction between the two with regard to policy. And there were times that were just downright embarrassing for Andrew Cuomo, which is why I think Cynthia Nixon was probably victorious overall, because it was just clear that he was grasping for straws in any attempt to attack her, and he ended up face-planting multiple times. So first of all, to kind of show you how he opened the debate, thus setting the tone for the debate, he decided to kind of show us just how much he was resisting Donald Trump.
Pleasure to be with you today, CBS. Thank you. Pleasure to be at Hofstra. And also, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the passing of Senator John McCain, who is not a member of our party, but a great, great American. And the flags in the state of New York will be at half-staff, regardless of what Washington does.
So that, to me, just came off as cringeworthy. I mean, it was nothing more than virtue signaling. And he honestly thinks that that tepid criticism of Donald Trump is somehow sufficient when it comes to resisting Donald Trump. But by and large, voters don't care about that. They care about policy. And Cynthia Nixon was quick to point out that you can't just resist Donald Trump when it comes to rhetoric. You actually have to combat what Donald Trump is doing with policy. And she wasted no time pouncing on Andrew Cuomo.
When it comes to opposing Donald Trump in New York State, we already have a corrupt corporate Republican in the White House. We don't need a corrupt corporate Democrat in Albany as his main opposition. We need to oppose Donald Trump not just with rhetoric, but with policy.
So that was awesome, and I think that for Cynthia Nixon, that really set the tone for the entire debate, because she made sure that she backed him into a corner and would not let him out. And as you're going to see throughout this debate, she didn't back off at all. She continuously attacked him, and I think that that's what you've got to do. I don't agree with this notion Bernie Sanders kind of puts forward that, I pride myself on never running a negative campaign ad. No, you have to go for the jugular, because these are corporate Democrats who are going to lie, who are going to obfuscate, and you've got to make sure that you're never on defense. You've got to play offense, and that's what she was doing, and she went on to list a plethora of policy reasons why Andrew Cuomo isn't just not a good liberal, but is actually fairly conservative. Now, she called him a corporate Democrat. He obviously didn't like that, and then he rebutted that claim with the infamous I'm not, you are argument, as you're going to see here.
There's only one corporate Democrat on this stage. It's my opponent, not me.
Governor, thank you.
I'd love to hear more about that.
Now, if you're wondering how a candidate who takes $0 from large multinational corporations can possibly be considered a corporate Democrat when she's the opposite of a corporate Democrat, well, Andrew Cuomo tried to explain himself as to how Cynthia Nixon is a corporate Democrat, and you're going to see here that he completely face planted.
My opponent, as a corporate donor to the mayor, called the mayor's office for special favors for her friends.
How am I a corporate donor?
Marcia Kramer asked the mayoral debate, if a donor called you, Mayor, would you call the Department of Investigations and report that a donor called you for a favor? That was Marcia Kramer's question to the mayoral debate candidates. Cynthia Nixon called the mayor's office, asked for favors for her friends.
I asked for no favors for friends, and I am not a corporate donor to anyone.
You are a corporation. When you file taxes as a corporation, you are a corporation.
I have never, nor
you donated
could I donate to anyone's political campaign.
You are a corporation.
I donate through my own personal funds.
Are you a corporation?
I am a person.
And you're a corporation.
But I do not ever make political contributions
yes, but you
through my.
Yes, but you're a corporation. You file taxes as a corporation.
That is categorically untrue. That is and I asked for no favor. What I asked for was for helicopters to stop flying over the Free Shakespeare in the Park.
Oh, that's not a favor?
Theater. That's not a favor. That's a favor to the people of New York.
How about for the tea house for Sarah Jessica Parker? That wasn't a favor?
I don't even know what you're referring to.
Well, you should read the newspapers.
All right.
Okay.
For me, that was the first genuinely cringeworthy moment. I think that the flag thing with McCain was pretty cringeworthy and just stupid in general, but that was a really cringeworthy moment for Andrew Cuomo. He completely face planted there, and I think that Cynthia Nixon, in pretty much laughing in his face, she had the perfect response, because his argument was that Cynthia Nixon is a corporate Democrat because she pays corporate taxes. Now, I have two things to say about that. First of all, he's accusing her of being a, quote, corporate donor because she was trying to, quote, buy influence by donating to politicians. But what corporate donors generally expect when they donate to politicians is favors in the form of tax cuts and deregulation. But what Cynthia Nixon asked for were helicopters to stop flying over a particular area of New York. So in order to accuse her of trying to buy enough influence to get the state to stop flying helicopters over a particular area of New York City, she would have had to know at the time she made the contribution that there would one day be helicopters flying over an area that would irritate her. So his argument doesn't make sense. She'd have to be able to see into the future if you're really going to count that as her trying to buy influence, because obviously that's not the same thing as the Koch brothers donating to Andrew Cuomo, because when they donate, they expect something in return, such as tax cuts. When Cynthia Nixon donated to public officials, you can't possibly say that she knew in advance that there'd one day be a favor, especially if the favor she's calling in is for helicopters to stop flying over a particular area. That's a complaint that any citizen can make. So that's such a laughable argument. I don't even know how he said it with a straight face. But the second thing I want to say about this is he criticizes the amount of money that she's paying in taxes, and later you're going to see that he's going to go on to criticize her also for not releasing enough of her tax returns. And the implication embedded with that criticism is that he wants to know more about her personal finances and the amount of taxes she's paying, because there's currently a dearth of information surrounding her. But at the same time, he's contending that she's paying the corporate tax rate, and he's sure about that. So she's a corporate Democrat because she's supposedly paying the corporate tax rate, but later on, he's going to contradict himself by saying that she needs to release her tax returns so we can know the tax rate that she's paying. So, do you see how he's speaking out of both sides of his mouth? On one hand, he's saying you're a corporate Democrat because you're paying the corporate tax rate, and then on another hand, later on, he's going to say, well, why don't you release your tax returns so we can see the tax rate that you're paying? This is a contradiction, and he doesn't see it, but maybe he wasn't thinking about the contradiction when he made this argument and didn't think about how this would later come back to bite him in the ass when he brings up the her not willing to release her tax return, supposedly. But you can tell that he was grasping for straws, and he started to get flustered because she continuously had him backed into a corner. And then we had this really nice Freudian slip from Andrew Cuomo that I just loved.
Can you stop interrupting? Can you stop interrupting?
Can you stop lying?
Yeah, as soon as you do.
So understand that what he did there was he inadvertently admitted that he was lying, because he said that he would stop lying only if she stopped. So you're essentially admitting that you're lying, Andrew. Do you not understand why that's not an argument you want to use? So, I mean, clearly he didn't intend to say that, and I don't want to imply that this was him explicitly admitting that he was lying, but this moment speaks more to his debate performance overall, because he was clearly getting flustered by her and was starting to break away from his talking points and lose sight of his overall argument. And to kind of demonstrate later how he knew he messed up, we saw another exchange that was relatively similar where she interrupted him, but he made sure to not make the same mistake again by inadvertently admitting that he was lying.
Can you please stop interrupting? Can you please do that?
If you stop lying, I will stop interrupting.
Okay, and let me, one other point.
Now that was some of the more fun portions of the debate where they really went back and forth, but I do want to get into some of the more harsher criticisms that Cynthia Nixon had of him, because she talked about all of the policy failures and how he's just not doing enough as a Democratic governor, and his excuse, you'll see, time and again is, well, look, I tried, I endorse all of these progressive policies, but Republicans just simply wouldn't let me get it done. Now, for anyone who's followed New York politics, this is pretty much Andrew Cuomo's go-to strategy. He takes strong progressive positions, knowing he'll never have to fight for them or sign them into law, because he empowers Republicans and uses them as an excuse when he's unable to pass policies that are actually progressive into law. Now, Cynthia Nixon called him out for this, and it was a really important moment.
I fought for congestion pricing.
Not comprehensive congestion pricing that would have made real inroads in funding the rescue of our New York City subway.
I fought for it very hard. The Republican Senate wouldn't pass it.
Why do we have a Republican Senate? It's because your empowerment of the IDC. That's the only reason.
We're going to move on. That is not true, and if you knew facts, you would know that.
Didn't you allow the Republicans to gerrymander their own districts?
No.
Yes, you did in 2011.
Do you know,
Ms. Nixon, we're going to move on. We're going to move on. Thank you, Governor.
Now, that was so frustrating to me, because right when it was getting good, the moderators stopped that discussion from going forward, when I think that, look, given the time restraints of the debate, you have to prioritize what's important for voters, and that's a really, really important piece of information that voters in New York should know about. Liberal voters who are imbuing Andrew Cuomo with the responsibility to represent them, they need to know that he's literally empowering Republicans to take control of New York's government, so that way he doesn't have to actually get any progressive policies codified into law. It's disgusting, it's scandalous, and they should have allowed Cynthia Nixon to hammer him for that. But unfortunately, they cut off that conversation. Now, she does hammer him further. She goes on to talk about corruption and how he's not fighting corruption, and the explicit implication in her argument here, an attack on him, quite frankly, is that the reason why he's not doing enough to fight corruption is because, frankly, he's pretty corrupt himself.
Campaign finance reform is something that Governor Cuomo has been promising ever since he ran in 2010. It's not hard to know how to do campaign finance reform. It's to close the LLC loophole, by which corporations can donate an unlimited amount of money to political campaigns. But since taking office, Governor Cuomo has received $16 million through the LLC loophole. That's more than every single legislator in Albany combined. To say he is disincentivized to close this loophole would be, would not begin to describe it strongly enough. He shut down the Moreland Commission, which was doing a job investigating corruption, when it came too close to him. Joe Prococo was his most trusted advisor, and he is heading to jail. Now, to prison. Either Joe Prococo was doing something that the governor expected him to do and advised him to do, or his right-hand man was doing something under his own nose that he had no idea about. So we have either incompetence or corruption. Which is it?
That was, in my opinion, a really, really strong attack that she lobbed against him, and you could just really see that she had him backed into a corner, and there was no argument that he could make to get himself out. So what he tried to do was, instead of playing defense the whole time, he tried to play a little bit of offense, and he tried to lob an attack against her. And really the only thing he can attack her for, since she doesn't really have a political record and since she's actually progressive, is her unwillingness, or supposed unwillingness, to release her tax returns.
I did release my one year of tax returns as soon as I entered the race, which is more than Andrew Cuomo did when he ran in 2010. He didn't release it until after the election.
Okay.
I released 4 more years recently. It's a big nothing burger, and that's all he has to say about it.
Okay, we're going to move on.
If it was a nothing burger, you wouldn't hide it for 3 hours on a Friday.
I didn't hide it.
Maybe Donald Trump's taxes are a nothing burger too.
Reporters came,
but it's
they
only
looked them
you
over, and they wrote
Trump.
nothing about it because there was nothing
well, then
to see.
Why wouldn't you release them for a real period of time instead of just for 3 hours
Why
with no
didn't
notice?
you release your taxes in 2010 when you ran? You didn't release them until after the election.
I
did
my
more.
taxes
You kept moving the goalposts.
I've released
you keep
them for
moving
20,
the goalposts and have a whole different set of rules for me than you have for you, and I don't think that's fair.
I've released them for 20 years. Here it is. I've released my taxes for 20 years. Will you? I didn't think so. Next question.
Let's move the goalposts again. Why don't I release them for 50 years?
Well, you said same rules. Those were my rules.
You didn't release your taxes when you ran in 2010 until after the election.
For 20 years.
That was one of the only moments where he managed to actually back her into a corner, and I think that by and large, he probably did get the better of that exchange, but even with that being said, this is a similar attack that Democrats used against Bernie Sanders as well, and the establishment always invokes this argument against progressives because by doing this, you kind of imply that progressives are somewhat like Trump, who also refused to release his tax returns, but in wanting to see Donald Trump's tax returns, that actually makes sense because he's a businessman with a history of not just fraud and corruption, but incompetence as well. So that's a much more persuasive argument to say that you want to see Donald Trump's tax returns. But I mean, at the end of the day, when it comes to this argument, I don't care. And I don't think that voters care too. Should Cynthia Nixon and other progressives like Bernie Sanders release as much of their tax returns as they possibly can find? Of course they should. But if they don't, do we really care that much? No, not necessarily, because these aren't individuals in the business world. You know, they're not like Donald Trump. So releasing his tax returns, you can kind of see who he's in bed with, you know, who is bankrolling him, the tax rate he's paying. But when it comes to people like Bernie Sanders and Cynthia Nixon, it's just a hacky argument that neoliberal Democrats use because they don't know how else to attack progressive Democrats. But at the same time, even if I think that this argument is not persuasive, I do think that it was still one argument that Andrew Cuomo managed to land against Cynthia Nixon, but for the most part, every other rebuttal that he tried to do when he was backed into a corner, it didn't work. It didn't land for him. And there were certain times where he tried to get out of a corner by flipping arguments, and he just embarrassed himself. I don't know how else to describe the situation. So, for example, she brought up how the Koch brothers gave him money, and as a result, he cut their taxes. That's corruption. Now, as she makes this argument, watch how he tries to flip it on her and make her the bad guy in this particular exchange.
I would say that there are a number of issues in which Andrew Cuomo claims credit, but is something that he has been forced into by labor and has fought and fought and fought, like the $15 minimum wage that now he calls himself a champion on. Just a few months before he passed the $15 minimum wage, he said it was a non-starter. He said the $13 minimum wage was too much. He was advocating for $10.50. The same is true of paid family leave. The same is true. In his first term, he declared war on unions, which is why the Koch brothers gave him $87,000 when he ran in 2010, because they knew that his policies were going to benefit billionaires like them and corporations like theirs, and were going to gut public pensions, which is what he did.
Thank you.
Yeah. If I just respond, because you can't have so many accusations that are so false. I think my opponent is upset with the Koch brothers, as they're the only ones who take more corporate tax loopholes than she does.
But Andrew, I thought that you said you didn't know enough about her taxes and personal finances, which is why you wanted her to release her tax returns. I mean, do you see what I'm talking about? He has no argument. He has no way, or he had no way for the whole debate of getting himself out of the corner that she backed him into. And it was glorious to watch. So I do want to get into some of the more policy substance areas because Cynthia Nixon made a phenomenal case. It was just incredibly strong when it comes to marijuana legalization. And towards the end here of this clip that I'm about to show you, you're going to see that Andrew Cuomo tried to imply that he's also in favor of marijuana legalization, even though he only recently changed his position on that because he has a progressive challenger who supports marijuana legalization. But watch how quickly she called him out on his bullshit.
I think it's very important that we legalize marijuana here in New York State. 8 other states have done it, plus the District of Columbia. There are a lot of reasons to do it, but first and foremost, because it's a racial justice issue. Because people across all ethnic and racial lines use marijuana at roughly the same rates, but the arrests for marijuana are 80% Black and Latino. We need to not only legalize marijuana here, but when this multi-billion-dollar industry comes to New York, we need to prioritize the individuals and the communities that have been the most harmed by the war on drugs. We need to follow the Oakland model. We need to follow the Massachusetts model and prioritize those communities, not only for licenses, but for small business loans and for other supports. And we need to use the tens of millions of dollars that we will have in revenue to invest in those communities that have been targeted and pay for jobs training and pay for education programs. And we need to parole people who are in jail for marijuana arrests, and we need to expunge their records and use some of this tax revenue for them to re-enter. And what I would say is that we're not talking about children smoking marijuana, right? We're talking about adults, and we're talking about that effectively marijuana in New York State has been legal for white people for a long time, and it's time to make it legal for everybody else.
I do believe the benefits outweigh the risks. That was the conclusion of a panel of experts.
Understood.
Last year you
But
said this was a gateway drug, and it wasn't until our campaign started fighting for it that you completely reversed yourself and said the facts on marijuana have changed.
Yeah.
Governor, what do you tell your...
Now that was great. I like how she did that there because there's so many corporate Democrats who are being challenged by progressives that adopt more progressive policies, and then they try to take credit for it as if they came up with that idea on their own accord. But really the only reason why you adopted that position is because you're being challenged by someone to the left of you. Had they not challenged you, you wouldn't have adopted that position. So I hate when they try to take credit for things that they don't deserve credit for, and I love that Cynthia Nixon called him out. Now, one thing I didn't show you in that clip was the framing of the question by moderators, which irritated me to no end. So the way they framed it was, well, Governor, what are we going to do, or what are we going to tell parents with kids who are worried that legalizing marijuana will encourage their children to use marijuana? And I mean, this is the same way that they framed the question when they posed it to Cynthia Nixon as well. And the answer is simple. If parents are worried that marijuana legalization will encourage their kids to smoke it, they should stop buying into propaganda because teen use actually declined substantially in Colorado after they legalized it. So stop framing questions this way about marijuana. It's stupid, it's nonsensical, and it's not grounded in reality at all. And people who make that argument, they wouldn't make an argument like that against alcohol, that we should make alcohol illegal because having it legal might encourage your kids to use it. No, we regulate it. We make sure that your kids are not legally allowed to drink alcohol until they're 21. And it's the same thing for marijuana. So I hate this framing so much, but I don't want to get carried away on that issue because that's just a whole nother story for a different day. But at the end of the day, I think that Cynthia Nixon did a really great job overall, and throughout the debate, there were clear differences between both candidates, and New Yorkers have a choice. They can choose a true progressive who's advocating for bold progressive policies that would absolutely benefit most New Yorkers, or they can have a corporate Democrat who clearly doesn't care about policy. He doesn't care about people. He only cares about his own career. And really, that's it. He's an opportunistic corporate Democrat. And I think that Cynthia Nixon did everything she possibly could have to show voters the true Andrew Cuomo. So at this point, when you have someone like Cynthia Nixon going up against Andrew Cuomo, there's no problem with regard to name recognition. So the only disadvantage that she might have, or the only disadvantages, I should say, is one, she's not an incumbent. There's always, that incumbent advantage for some reason. And two, It's probably the case that Andrew Cuomo is outraising her, although admittedly I didn't check yet. But I will say this. If you live in New York, vote for Cynthia Nixon. If you vote for Andrew Cuomo and you're a liberal, you just have to accept that you're more conservative. You are conservative because this is an individual who, again, is not politically progressive. He is a centrist at best. So I will leave you with a clip of Cynthia Nixon. This was probably my favorite moment from the debate, passionately advocating for a state-run single-payer healthcare plan. And I wish I could vote for her. I wish I lived in the state of New York just for this election, because you're going to see here that she is the real deal.
We can insure all of our people here by a single-payer Medicare for all system. We can do it better. We can do it cheaper. We can do it with no co-pays, with no deductibles, and 98% of New Yorkers would pay less for their health care than they do now.
The same study also found this would nearly triple the state tax rate for an average family from 6% to 18%. That's a family making roughly $100,000 to $150,000.
If you look at, say, what a family now who earns, let's say, $49,000, the cost of health care for that family is $17,500. The cost between the individual and the employer would be a sixth of that. What we would have is a payroll tax in order to pay for it. It would be taken out of people's payrolls the same way Social Security is taken out. It would be an overall savings for 98% of New Yorkers, and it would be an enormous savings for employers here. It is seen that it could create 200,000 jobs because employers would no longer be responsible for providing health care for their employees. It would drive medical costs and pharmaceutical costs down 40%. We have a million uninsured New Yorkers in the state, but we have millions more who are underinsured, who are one diagnosis, who are one accident away from bankruptcy. This is the kind of change that New Yorkers really care about. This is the kind of change that our Democratic Party should be embracing in order to address the incredible inequality here. Health care is a human right. We can insure all of our people, and we can do it at enormous savings, not only to individuals and to employers, but to the state itself.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.